All right. For those who are visiting with us this morning, and for those who haven't been with us, we've been going through a series over the past weeks called Moments from Garden to Glory, and that's why we have all these candles along the wall. And I think it's starting to look kind of pretty with all these candles lit. But we've been going through this journey, which is leading us up to Easter in a couple weeks with Christ's resurrection. And so we've been following this journey, looking through moments of his life and his death and his resurrection, beginning with the Garden of Gethsemane when he prayed with his disciples, and continuing, if you follow this in a circle all the way around the church, you come down here, it follows a journey of 21 moments along this path. And for those of you who have been with us and have been on this journey with us throughout this series, you know what time it is. It's pop quiz time, which means everybody needs to look at me and not look at where they wrote down what all the stations are. So moment number 1, the garden. Moment number 2, the prayer. Moment number 3, the betrayal. Moment number 4, the Sanhedrin. Moment number 5, the denial. I see those of you who are reading from your cheat notes. Moment number 6, the judgment. Moment number 7, the beating. Moment number 8, the via. Moment number 9, the Cyrene. Moment 10, the women. And now I've run out of fingers. Number 11, the nails. Number 12, the shame. And that carries us through all the way through last week, and we're doing 3 more this morning, moments 13, 14, and 15, which are the promise, the mother, and the darkness. Now, I have to tell you, I'm really thankful for this church. I'm thankful to be here. Can you believe it's almost been 6 months already?
Already? Wow.
I'm just waiting for those of you who are saying, oh, really? It's only been that long? He's only been here 6 months? I appreciate the support of this church, and for those of you who don't know, this past week, since last Sunday, I made a trip back up to Indiana and back down here. I went to see my family this week. For those of you who don't know, my family, my wife and my 2 daughters are still in Indiana. As my wife is finishing up nursing school, they'll be moving down here at the end of May. So I've been making lots of drives back up to Indiana, and they made a trip down here. They got to meet everybody at Christmas time. And when it came time for them to go back at the end of Christmas and the first week of January, when they had to go back because school was starting again, my wife wanted to take the GPS with her, which is fine with me. I had gotten to know the roads around here well enough that I could get around and find things, and she was not familiar with the trip between here and Indiana, making the trip north all that well. So she took the GPS, put in our address, and it told her which way to go back to Indiana. So she leaves, and I'm sitting home depressed because my wife and daughters have left and I'm by myself again. And I'd say probably about an hour after they left, I get a text from my wife that simply says, "Why am I in South Carolina?" Why are you in South Carolina? You have to go north to get to Indiana. Indiana is considerably further north than here. Why are you in South Carolina? And I asked her, I was like, you're going the way the GPS told you to go? And she said, yes. And it took you to South Carolina? Yes. And you didn't notice? Then it told you to go south? No, I just followed the instructions, went where it told me. And I was like, well, what instructions is it giving you? And so we looked at, she looked at the GPS to find out which way it was sending her. And I looked at maps online to figure out how it's sending her. And it turns out the GPS knew what it was doing.
Yes.
Because it's actually about the same time to go through South Carolina and then up through Tennessee and Kentucky as opposed to going through West Virginia. I didn't know this. And it's actually quite a pleasant drive. But she was not familiar with those roads. We didn't know anything about those roads. But by the time that she had realized it was too far to change directions and go back the other way, the decision had already been made. And that's what we're going to be talking about this morning. We're going to be talking about decisions and the choices that we have to make and the choices that Jesus made when he was on the cross. Now, we just went through the moments, and depending on how familiar you are with the story, it may not be very clear where it is in the story. So where we are in the story is that Jesus has been condemned to be crucified, and he's being crucified, which is the most heinous method of execution that has ever been created, ever been devised. And he's been nails through the wrists and through the feet, hanging on these wooden beams where the beams were dropped into a hole so that his shoulders are dislocated, and he's basically suffocating under the strain of crucifixion. Very painful method of death. And he's hanging on the cross, but yet he still has some decisions, some choices to make. And that's what we're taking a look at today. Now, there's a thing about choices. We all have choices to make. Like, every time that I go back to Indiana now, I have to make a decision. Am I going to go the way that I'm familiar with, going north through Virginia and West Virginia, or go the other way that the GPS tells me and go through South Carolina and Tennessee and Kentucky? I have to make that choice. And everybody has to make choices. When you're married, there are choices that have to be made. And you're not the only one who has to make the choices. There's somebody else involved as well. You have to make the choices together. There's a story about a couple that when they got married, they went through their premarital counseling. And they sat with the pastor and they talked about what marriage was going to be like and the choices that they were going to have to make. And that they had to figure out a way to make choices together. And so they came to the conclusion they were going to do a very simple method for making choices. The simple solution that they came up with is that the husband was going to make all the small choices, all the simple choices. And the wife, I'm sorry, I messed that up. Let me back up. The wife was going to make all the simple choices, all the small decisions, and that the husband was going to make all the big decisions, and only the big decisions. Well, 20 years later, they had moved away, but they came back to visit, and they met the pastor who had married them. And he asked them, how has this worked out for you? And the husband said, it's worked out great for us. In 20 years of marriage, we've never had a big choice to make. The first moment that we're looking at today, and this is moment number 13 on our journey, is the promise. And this is a moment that really signifies the separation of choices and the two divergent paths. Because when Jesus is crucified, when he's hanging on the cross, there are two crosses next to him. And there are two criminals, one on each side, who are being crucified along with him for their crimes. Now, the difference between them and Jesus is that Jesus had not done anything worthy of being crucified, but yet he was being crucified anyway. These two men were criminals. They were being crucified for what they had done. They had actually done what they were being crucified for, and they were getting what was considered to be a just punishment. Nowadays, we wouldn't consider it to be a just punishment because we have a phrase called cruel and unusual punishment. that prevents crucifixion from being used. But these two men, they knew what the punishment would be for their crimes. They committed their crimes. They were being punished for their crimes. And yet on the cross, they're facing this decision. You have the one criminal on the one side who is looking at Jesus, and he's saying, you're supposed to be the King of the Jews? You're supposed to be the Messiah? You're supposed to be the one to save us? And you can't even save yourself? Who are you supposed to be? And so he's just getting on Jesus. Now, in the Bible, it uses the word blasphemy, that this criminal was blaspheming Jesus. And this is a big word that we use in church and we don't use outside of church. And so sometimes, because we only use it in the one context, we lose the effect of what the meaning is of the word. So we have the word blasphemy. Basically, what blasphemy, if I can even say it, what blasphemy means is to make light of spiritual things. Basically, to simplify the spiritual things. That there comes a point where we can lower the value of something by the way that we talk about it, that we make it smaller, that we make it something common. And so that's what it says that this man was doing to Jesus. Oh, you're the King of the Jews. You're the Messiah. Well, come on. Save yourself. And then save us too, because you're the Messiah. You can do that. And so that's blasphemy. That's what this criminal was doing. That he was taking something sacred, something spiritual, the idea of a Messiah, the idea of a Savior, taking that idea and making it insignificant. And that's what he was doing. And that's the choice that he made there. But the Bible tells us that there was another criminal who was hanging beside him. And this other criminal had a different view on things. He said, you're receiving the punishment for your crime. I'm receiving the punishment for my crime. We're receiving the punishment that we deserve, but this man's done nothing wrong, but yet he's still here. He could have avoided this. How is he not the Messiah if he could have avoided this? How is he not the Messiah if he could have saved his own life prior to this, but he chose to go to the cross? And he chose to go to the cross. He made that decision to go to the cross. And so, Jesus had already made this decision to face crucifixion. But then at this moment, at the end of their lives, in this hour, the one criminal said to the other, do you not even fear God? You're about to die. You are about to die. You are moments away from your death. You're moments away from your death. Nothing else matters. Shouldn't you be crying out to God at this point? Because nobody else can save you. Shouldn't you be crying out to God at this point? Do you not even fear God? That's what he said to him. Do you not even fear God? That in this moment, close to your death, that you would blaspheme this man. And so, we come to this moment at the end of their lives with these two criminals hanging next to Jesus. And there's still a decision. There's still a decision to be made. And here, more than just about anywhere else in the Bible, we see a decision that goes down two paths that can never be turned from again. We see it more here than anywhere else. We see the criminal on this side who decides and chooses to blaspheme Jesus, and he goes down this choice. And he has no life after this moment. His life ends. That's the choice that he makes, and that's the path that he goes down. Jesus never says where that path leads. But down this other path, this other criminal says, Jesus, he makes this choice. Jesus, remember me. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. That's a different path. That's a different choice. And Jesus tells him where that path is going to lead. Jesus tells him, today you will be with me in paradise. Today you will be with me in paradise. That path, that decision led to paradise. We're going to revisit this idea of this choice in just a minute. In just a minute, we have another moment in between here, moment 14. The mother. This is another moment on the cross. And there is a choice being made here in this moment. It's a little bit different than the previous choice. This is a choice that's being made by Jesus. As he's hanging on the cross and he looks down, there are some women there who are there when Jesus is being crucified. They're mourning Jesus' death as it is happening. And one of the women who's there is his own mother. Now, in the Jewish culture of Jesus' time, it was the responsibility of the oldest son to take care of the mother after the father dies. Now, we don't know what happened to Joseph, Mary's husband. We don't know what happened to Joseph. Christian tradition tells us that by this time Joseph had died, which is likely because by this point Joseph would have been pushing 50 years old, and the average life expectancy for somebody in Joseph's profession at that time was about 30 years. So it was likely that Joseph had passed away by this point, and that it was up to Jesus, the oldest son of Mary, to provide for his mother. But now Jesus himself is going to the cross. So it's still Jesus' responsibility to provide for his mother. And, he could make a decision here. He could make a decision that, well, I'm leaving. I'm not going to be here much longer. It's not my responsibility anymore. Somebody else can worry about that. But that's not the choice that he makes. The choice that he makes is to continue his obligations and continue his responsibilities to his mother. He looks down, and also with Mary was one of Jesus' disciples. It was John. John, when he writes about himself in the Gospel of John, he refers to himself as the disciple who Jesus loved. And he never really refers to himself by name. He calls himself the disciple who Jesus loved. And Jesus and John obviously had a very special relationship. And two things are happening when Jesus looks down at John and Mary, and he says to Mary, look, here is your son. And says to John, look, here is your mother. And from that moment forward, John took care of Mary. What Jesus is saying to John, what he's saying to Mary, is that I'm still taking care of you. You will be taken care of. I care about you. You deserve better than what you're seeing me endure. But at the same time, he's saying to John, saying it's now your responsibility to take care of her. What he's saying to John is, you are my brother. You are my brother. I love you like a brother. And because you are my brother, this is our mother. And that we need you to take care, we need you to take care of her. It's your responsibility. You take care of her. And the Bible tells us from that day, John took care of Mary. He took her into his home. And one of the interesting things, this is another thing that's not in the Bible, but it's one of the things related to Christian tradition that we know about, is that we don't know this for sure, but of Jesus' 12 disciples, the 12 core disciples, only one, according to Christian tradition, did not die a premature death. There was Judas, who betrayed Jesus, and then ended up killing himself. Then there are 10 who are martyred, who are killed because of their faith. Only one, according to Christian tradition, lived out his full life. The only one who had the responsibility of taking care of Jesus' mother. So even as Jesus was taking care of his mother, God's continuing to care for Mary by taking care of John. Protecting John, because protecting John is protecting his mother as well. We see that. I'm going to take you on to our third moment here this morning. 15th moment in our journey, the darkness. And I'm going to read this verse again. I want you to hear it. There's 2 verses from the book of Luke. It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon, while the sun's light faded, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. That is absolutely spectacular. That is absolutely spectacular. Darkness came over the whole land. In the middle of nothing, darkness came over the whole land. In the middle of the day. Can you imagine that? Middle of the day. It's getting close to noon now. Suddenly, everything turns dark. You can't see. It's like night. For 3 hours, you barely can see. And it talks about the sun's light is failing. And the curtain of the temple, the curtain that separates the holy place from the Holy of Holies, is torn in two. Supernatural. Amazing. And you know, that's an absolutely sensational verse in the Bible. And we could talk a lot about the darkness. We could talk a lot about the veil and about all these amazing things. You know, we could talk about, what caused the darkness? What was it like? There are talks about whether or not it was a solar eclipse. But then, solar eclipse, in theory, shouldn't be possible at the time of the Passover because it's the wrong time of the moon cycle. We could talk about all that. But that's not what I want to talk about. Because in seeing all that spectacular, in seeing all of that supernatural that we never see, it's very easy to miss couple small phrases in there that show something absolutely amazing. It says, it was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. How much time passed there?
3 hours.
3 hours. How much time had passed from when Jesus was crucified until this moment? 3 hours. He was crucified about 9 in the morning. So from 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon is 6 hours, right? 360 minutes. We pass over 6 hours like it's nothing. It's less than a full workday, right? For many people, it's less than a night's sleep. For some of you, it might be more than a night's sleep. 6 hours. But we forget that during this entire 6 hours, Jesus is hanging there with nails in his wrists and nails in his feet. We forget that he's hanging there for 6 hours. We pass over this like it's one quick moment because we've been going through moments. Moments can be short. Moments can be instantaneous. Moments can be long. And it always depends on what you're going through that helps determine how long a moment feels. A moment when you're doing something fun and you're playing a game or talking with friends, moments go quickly. But when you're in pain, when things aren't going well, when you're afraid, when you're alone. Moments can feel like they last a lifetime. And so for 6 hours, Jesus is hanging on the cross. Only way he's able to breathe is to push against the nails in his feet to lift up his body enough that he can breathe. And that's what he's enduring for 6 hours. And we forget in this verse that passes over 3 hours so quickly, we forget that at any moment, at any second in that time, Jesus could have ended the whole thing. He could have stopped it at any second through that whole thing. We think about Jesus' sacrifice as being a momentary thing that he chose to go to the cross and he walks down this path and this path takes him to the cross, and from there he doesn't have to do anything more but die. See, the thing about Christ's death is that it's not these two paths that we talked about before that lead to completely opposite destinations. Because he walks down the one path that's leading to paradise. He's walking down the one path that's leading to salvation for everyone. And we seem to think that the first step down the path is all it takes. But it wasn't the first step down the path that did it all. It was every step down the path. Because at any step down the path, he could have gone the other way. In the midst of pain, in the midst of death. 6 hours, 360 minutes, 21,600 seconds. 21,600 seconds. That's a lot of moments. And every single moment, he continued down the path to death and sacrifice. And that's the path he chose. I think that, it was about 10 years ago, I read a book by Max Lucado called He Chose the Nails. I remember almost nothing about the book. I've basically forgotten all of it. But I've still, ever since reading it, have been enamored with this thought that not only did Jesus choose to die, but that he also chose the method of dying. That he also chose the nails as his method of dying. Because choosing the nails, it's not an instantaneous moment where he dies in one sensational beheading or something like that. It's not like that. It's a long series of moments that he continues to choose. And so often when we talk about salvation, we talk about the Christian life, we talk about it in these two paths. Where one path goes this way, as the one criminal did, of blasphemy, and the other path leads to paradise. Now, I believe that one choice by the one criminal, I believe that one choice did take him to paradise. I believe that all it takes is that decision, that calling on the name of Christ and asking for that takes us down that path. But there's more to that path. For those of us who are making that decision more than minutes from death. Because we still have that path to walk. We still have decisions to make. We still have journeys and choices. I firmly believe that Jesus' manner of death was chosen specifically to show us our manner of life. Let me say that again. I believe that Jesus' manner of death shows us what should be our manner of life. That we face choices, that we are on a journey, that we have to continue focusing that we have to continue choosing. I like to think, this is not biblical, this is just something I like to think. I like to think that for every moment that Jesus was on a cross, or every time he had to make the decision to continue to die, for every moment he was thinking of one of us. That there was one moment that he was hanging on the cross that he thought of you and said, yes, I still choose to die. And so when we think about that death, when we think about that sacrifice, if we think about it constantly, if we think about that path, do we think about it and make the choice? Jesus, you thought of me. Let me choose you. Every moment of every day, let me choose you. 360 minutes. Seems short in comparison to an entire life. None of us has the power to prevent our own death, but Jesus did. And he still chose to go down that path. Charles Stanley, who is a pastor, he's been a pastor for many, many years down in Atlanta, tells a story about when he was in seminary. And he had an evangelism class, and at the end of the semester, they would sit down to take their test for the evangelism class, and he gave them the instructions. Read through the entire test before you start it. Read through the entire test. And then follow the directions. And inevitably, some students would say, no, can't waste my time reading through the entire test. I'm just going to start. And I'm going to start at the beginning and go through as quickly as I can. But what they would find is when they came to the end of the test, the last instruction was, if you would like an A, just write, I want an A, and turn it in. And don't do the rest of the test. And so for those who didn't follow the instructions, they would get to the end of the test and be so frustrated that they had taken this entire 2-hour-long test. Many others followed the instructions, read to the end of the test, saw the instruction, wrote, I want an A, turned it in, walked out. But then there were others who read all the way to the end, saw the instructions, and took the test anyway. Because they didn't feel that they deserved to get an A that easily. It's all it really is making a decision. There are these two paths. There are these two paths that are before us. But then, down the journey, there are still choices. We're called to live a life of moments. We're called to live a life of choices. And so we have to keep making the choices. We have to keep focusing. Now, one choice is not going to send us all the way to the other path, but a choice that is not moving us towards him is simply that, not moving us towards him. So we have the opportunity to make the choices and go down this path. So what choice will you make? You have the choices before you. And you have those choices every day, every moment. Let's pray.